Good morning, and thank you all for joining us this morning. We've currently there's a good few amounts of people joining us now, so we'll see how this unfolds as we get going with it. So thank you for joining us. My name is Rick Smith, and I'm joined here with Ben Westoby, my colleague.
Good morning, everyone.
We'll both be going through this presentation together, and we'll be explaining as to our experiences that we have encountered over the years with different scenarios. The purpose of this presentation is to cover the areas that we've assisted. It started from a very early period for myself, with my father encountering financial difficulties in his business. And this is why Forbes Burton was born from that period. And it's experiences that we've had, and we've considered that it's a useful thing to bring into your business, because a lot of people provide marketing courses and sales courses and so forth, but very few provide information and advice to you when things go wrong in business, and they often do, because we've currently got 55.9% of all UK businesses die before they are 5 years old. So inevitably, there's an awful lot of companies will encounter difficulties in their trading, and having the skills and the knowledge to deal with them is an important part of it, because it's an element of business which most people don't have. They're good at what they do. They're good at making the widgets or whatever it is they do, but inevitably there are times when you will come across problems, and this presentation is about trying to provide you with relevant information to assist you in that situation. We're getting more and more people joining us now, so thank you very much. So we'll start. I'll hand over to Ben, and we'll flip through these slides and give you an explanation as to them.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to flick on to the first slide here, and Rick's just mentioned now a statistic, and we're bombarded with statistics all day, every day. But just going over that stat again, 55.9% of all UK businesses die before they are 5 years old. So that means, putting it another way, if you are opening a business today, there's more than a 50% chance that you're not going to make it 5 years. That's pretty startling. Mm. That's pretty crazy. And what we're not taking into account with that 45% that do limp through, or do make it through, or they might bound through, is, are they going to be encountering problems? Are they getting through by the skin of their teeth, or are they flying through? We don't know that, but it's a startling statistic. It really is.
So the first thing we need to establish is, do you know what's going wrong? So it's knowing that things are going wrong, but do you know what those areas are? Because obviously 55.9% don't. So you've got your financial awareness, how exposed you are, a holistic view, viability of the business, and your company isn't you. Now those are all four key elements to the areas in which we'll be talking more through further on.
But just pressing on some of those points, I know it's not really relevant today for the webinar unless somebody wants to ping an answer through now. But what we like to do when we give a presentation in front of people here is we ask people, who knows within 50 quid, 100 quid, what's in their bank account right now? Honestly, who can say what the last 3 transactions were on the account? Who can say when they last looked at their business bank account? And it's alarming, Rick, isn't it, in the room when
we've got a few responses now. There's Steve, Sarah. I think our percentage there, Ben, is very low, isn't it? On what response we've got back already, and we tend to find out when we're in presenting in front of people is that it's a very low figure that people do actually understand or are financially aware sufficient to know where their business is at any one given time.
And that leads really on to how exposed somebody is, not only from a financial perspective, but also we see these companies that are really cart horses for bigger companies, and how exposed they are every day, not knowing what their main contractor is going to do the next week, and how that's going to leave their company. How many subcontractors have you spoken to in the last 6 months, Rick, that have suffered at the hands of people like Carillion? Their business has gone overnight.
Yeah, there's an awful lot, and the problem is that, you know, you probably heard the term all our eggs in one basket, and we come across this quite a lot, that they are financially dependent upon one main client to provide them with that work. Now, that can be switched off overnight, as we know with the Carillion analogy.
And similarly, flogging a dead horse. You know, we get some people that ring up, and, you know, have to sit there and be polite, but if you listen to their business model, it was never going to work. You know, not from day one. If you look at the costings accurately, they're just not making enough margin, or their business idea is dated. And leading on to the final point now is this confusion that, and it's important to make this distinction at the moment. We are mainly talking about limited companies here, especially as we get further down the webinar. But the company isn't you. You know, a limited entity is its own breathing, living thing. If you don't like Wednesdays, or you go out with your pals on a Thursday night and you don't get in to work until, you know, 11 o'clock on a Friday, your company shouldn't suffer, or the company shouldn't suffer. So it's important to make that distinction between you as a director or a manager or a person or a shareholder of the company and the company itself. So just then going on now to how to stop some of these things going wrong, which is a bit of a title sheet for us here, and these are some of the points that we're going to be discussing over the next few slides. So get straight into those, Rick.
Okay, so your figures. It's one of the most important areas of your business, and knowing them, or in fact, if it's not, I come across a lot of people which have got successful, or have had successful businesses that have been run on, would you believe, sort of a fag packet, really. Recently, I had I'm still dealing with a company, a £3 million turnover company, and 19 staff, and you know, I took my hat off to this guy because he achieved that by not really understanding his financial position of this company, but unfortunately, he didn't keep enough control, and therefore he's had to ask us to assist him through this process now. So it's important that if you're not a figures man, that's fine. Then get somebody else that can, be that on a ad hoc basis. But there are now a lot of, you know, we are going digital for next year with the HMRC. So a lot of software now is about that enables you to keep a track of your finances of your business.
And it's also the embarrassment sometimes when I've been dealing with a group of directors who are in trouble, and towards the end of the company's life, and we've actually established some sort of understanding of the figures. And I'm talking basic things here. I'm talking about understanding how much money's coming in, having a track of what's going out that week, or who you've got to pay, or forecasted incomes. But the actual penny drops at that point. It's too late, unfortunately, at that point. But they realise that what we're discussing, or the simple things we're asking and introducing, they've never done. And if they had done that 6 months or a year prior, things could have been different, or at least they could have had control of the situation. Okay. So I think the next slide, a bit of a buzzword really, cash flow. Pretty much everyone that rings me, my business is focused, I've got cash flow problems. Yes, cash flow problems, because there is none. What we're really talking about here is the true meaning of cash flow, which is to do with liquidity. And that's really to do with synchronizing what's coming in and what's going out. Obviously, a company that isn't viable is going to have major cash flow problems, but that's because the company's not viable. We're talking more here of keeping a steady flow coming through and being able to manage that correctly.
I was last year into a company, multi-million pound company, 15 members of staff, and they had embarked upon a growing strategy. Well, was it a strategy? No, well, they embarked upon growing really without really a strategy behind that growth plan. And they had very little resources. We're talking £150,000 overdraft facility in a bank account to substantiate a multi-million pound company. And inevitably, it wasn't working. And they were just increasing their creditor balances to the tune of £1 million to try and then cash flow this business. And when I sort of sat with them and drilled down through it, they were proposing applications, tendering for this work, and within that, they had good, strict regimes of how they did it. But one key factor they didn't look into is the funding, the financing, the financial elements of these agreements that enter into these contracts. And it's only when you start to sort of put that bit into the mix, you then form the cake, and that's the part of the ingredients they missed out on. So inevitably, the company got into a lot of problems, and we actually had a lot of support from creditors to get that business to continue. So growth, it's a cash flow consumer. It's great to grow in business. It's important that you do, but you also need to be very mindful of how you are going to do that, and do you have the reserves in which to grow the business at the rate in which you are intending for it to grow.
I think that's a really important point that Rick raised there about growth and the success stories of, I've had a number of examples over the years, primarily sort of these artisan bakers and such like, who managed to get a product of theirs into a chain or a high street store or whatever the case may be. And they're used to sort of dropping off their cakes or whatever to the corner shop and being paid cash on delivery. All of a sudden, their order books increase tenfold overnight, and they're going to get paid, if they're lucky, 60 days. Mr. Tesco and such like, probably nearer 90. I don't know that for a fact, by the way, people, but what I'm trying to say is that the big players, they're not going to... Who was it we spoke to? It was the lady who... We were fortunate enough to listen to the person who started Green and Blacks. Mm-hmm. And when she first got her chocolate bar into the big stores, she nearly went bust. Perfect cash flow scenario. I mean, it was on the verge of huge success. One of the coolest brands. It was voted a couple of years ago by Vogue magazine. But this thing was nearly bust because of lack of cash flow.
And many successful companies have gone through it, and it's important to manage it to forecast what you're proposing to do and how you're going to go about it. So it's back to managing your money again. You need to be on top of it and to be aware of the direction you're taking your business, and make sure that if you do have credit terms that align with suppliers, then they make sure they do. If you do something you don't get paid for 30, 60, 90 days, then consequently, you want to keep working for these people, but you are then becoming their banker in essence. So it's an important area of your business is to be mindful of, which is cash flow. Now, next one is your borrowing. Now, in any business, you are going to need and require some borrowing at some point to grow the business, to take maybe a different direction within the business. So, again, this one is relating to borrowing, but obviously borrowing in a way in which you can manage that for the purpose of what it's there to do. I do come across companies where they have, a recent one, £450,000 that they took on. But I've noticed over the past sort of year and a half how they've been sort of consuming that. The director's been having some great holidays. In fact, he very rarely attends the office nowadays, and consequently that's had a knock-on effect not only to the business but the staff as well, because they are having to. It's a rot that sets in to your business if you are. So it's a good thing to get money to sort of grow the business, but there's got to be a strategy behind it. But it also can be a negative if you don't have that strategy to to deal with it.
One of the things that I introduced a few years ago on our standard questionnaire was to get an understanding of what borrowings the company had had in the last 12 months, or what attempts of borrowings. And it's nice to know this, but it was really for our own information. It's really for our own understanding of what these companies are doing in their last stages of life, really, or certainly leading up to the point of them being in trouble. And there's this panic borrowing. As Rick's just said there, borrowing as a strategy, as a tool to grow your business or to plug a gap in a healthy business scenario is normal. Applying to every, I'm trying to think of the name of the company now that everyone knows, but it's sort of the last gasp, longer version of business loans. You know, getting your hands on this very expensive short-term borrowing as desperate measures to be paying off and consolidating old debts. If you find yourself even attempting or thinking to do that, then you really, really do need to ask yourself, you know, why are you doing this? There's a deeper problem here. But not only that, but they will be asking for personal guarantees. They will be asking for security. And if things don't pan out and work out, then you're going to be exposing yourself as a director if you are operating through a limited company, of course.
There is the one that Ben mentioned, I think, was Funding Circle, which is the one that you wanted. I think you were going to raise on.
No, it wasn't. That is one of them, but there's a few sort of these fast, quick quid sort of setups.
Lots of it is. There are a lot of alternative funding out there that we come across quite a lot, and the reality is, I think, high street banking, your main bank streams are the better areas to go initially to see what they can propose to yourselves. And then consequently, you know, take your time. There is a lot of different alternative funding, different ways, different rates. Just be mindful of who you're borrowing from, and like Ben said, that, you know, be mindful because they will ask for a personal guarantee on it, and therefore you are not just exposing the business, but you're exposing yourself to it as well. We see this one a lot, and HMRC tend to be used as a bank. Because it doesn't, I think the main reason is it doesn't stop people from trading initially, because they can still buy their supplies from the builders, merchants to go and fix that job. So if they've got £100 in the bank account, they can still buy those supplies, go and do the job, and then get remunerated from doing that work. HMRC, depending on where you're at with it, but HMRC will not stop that. They you know, you utilise your monies to go and do your trade, and what you need to be mindful of is that you are obviously apportioning your liability, your requirements to the HMRC as it accumulates. And we do, one of the things I do state when I go into companies is to hold your VAT in a separate account to your current account. It's a small little thing to do, but it does enable you to work on your VAT on a daily basis. So, you know, if you've got an invoice coming in, you can then proportion it accordingly and separate it.
That's interesting. We just had somebody ping up there saying, yeah, but who the bloody hell does that in the real world? Well, yeah, I get that. I understand. We're not sort of reading from textbooks when we do our job. We do have a good understanding of small businesses. The bottom line is, if you can't proportion 20% of your VAT, for example, to a reserve account on a consistent basis, there's a problem. There is a long-term problem here. One of the things that we do here when we, and this is quite alarming, when we speak to a client and we get them to send us over a questionnaire about their position, we will ask them who their creditors are, and we'll have, you know, juicings or their stationery suppliers, we'll have whatever it might be, and then we'll ring back, and you know, it might amount to sort of 20 or 30 grand or whatever, and then we'll ring back, and then in the discussion they'll mention, you know, 50 or 60 grand to HMRC. And it's like, well, they don't actually consider HMRC as a creditor. But what's really very important to know is that HMRC are probably, although they don't get preference anymore, they've got special powers in that they don't need to enforce debts like other creditors. They can just come in at the drop of a hat. They can come in and wind you up without having to get a a CCJ on you or statutory demand. So, please don't ignore HMRC, and as the heading said there, don't use them as a bank.
Your expansion, it's back on the sort of slide we mentioned earlier on, but again, as you're expanding, every time you're taking on work, really that is expansion that you're doing. The more you're doing of it, the more you're expanding, obviously, and the more mindful you need to be of where you're going with that. Being paid, for example, for if you enter into, I don't know, maybe say, let's think you are doing paving, you're doing drives for residential properties, and you leaflet the area, you get people engaging and want to take your services. You then map out how long it's going to take to do that job, and if you've got 3, you map out how long that's going to be, and then you work on having to purchase the supplies to be able to do that job. And you may have to do a lead time on purchasing them supplies. Maybe it's certain bricks or something that you have to order. They take 14 days, but you have to pay for them beforehand. All these things are, your business is starting to expand. You're starting to get control of the business, and you need to be mindful of how you're going to do that. Therefore, you can then go back to the client who wants you to do their drive and say, I would like 50% up front to be able to cover the costings, and it's just a little thing like that can make a big difference to your business, because you've all of a sudden then cash flowed yourself out of you having to initially purchase all this relevant goods that you're not really going to get the job on until they arrive, and then you've got to invoice, and then the snagging lists and so forth, and all that lot takes time. So expanding your business, be mindful how you're expanding.
Margins. I mean, what's the old phrase? Turnover for vanity, profit margin for sanity. We often see when people are trying to grow at a great rate of knots that they take their eye off that. And if you don't protect that margin, just go carefully. Go carefully.
Your exit strategy. What is it? Do you have one? Do you need one? Should you have one? These are all sort of questions you want to ask of yourself about it. Maybe that you are in business to not get out of business and you want to continue with it and so forth. But you also need an exit strategy, because it might be that, like your Carillions, that decision's taken from you, although it's not in your plan to exit the business, to sell it, or to do something different with it. Then you've got to be mindful of an exit strategy, because that might be forced against you or upon you at a time that it wasn't what you had planned for.
I think there's two angles to this, really. Is you hear these sort of high-powered investors talking about they've got a 5-year exit strategy and such like, and so there's that on one hand, and then there's the what happens if things fail. It's really important on both levels, and it's quite interesting that the logistics behind a closure when we're dealing with one, whether it be a solvent closure or not. It's not as easy as you'd think. You say to yourself, right, well, we'll shut the doors on Tuesday. Well, we can't, because we've got a lease in place, or we need to keep the insurances going to be able to sell the vans, and we need to. So it's really not as simple as people think sometimes, just flicking the switch off. So whether it be a solvent exit or not, understanding your position at any time and how you can sort of throw the switch is perhaps not a nice thought, but an important one.
It's got to be a part of your strategy. So your options when things are going wrong. So we've discussed about things that can go wrong. Now we're moving into a point of your options when things are going wrong. So what is a company in distress?
Again, that's another point when we do a presentation where I've just clicked through one of the slides there, because we would usually ask for people's feedback. Again, that doesn't work too well in a webinar scenario, so I think we'll just run through a few of ideas here.
Yeah. Okay. So a company in distress. So you're struggling to pay bills. You've got pressures from HMRC. You're in arrears of them, and they're starting to want you to not only pay your current, but your toxic, which is the amount of money that you owe them up to a given point. You've got supplier pressures. A multiple of these is a signal that a company is in distress.
Yeah, Toby's just said here on the questions, and it's a very good point that staff aren't happy. I mean, there's no right or wrong here. Signs of distress. We're just having a sort of discussion about this. But certainly, having staff turning up, or you're not wanting to go into work, there's cracks appearing. That's a valid point.
On that note, we've just had one recently where 2 key members of the staff of this company are leaving, and it's a shock to the director. He didn't see it, and he is now in a bit of a tailspin on this, because trying to replace 2 key members of his business that have helped him grow that business for many years is difficult to then deal with, because you've got to try and staff up to cater for that. So there's 3 points here. There's the cash flow test, the balance sheet test, and the legal action test.
What we're really doing here is we're starting to introduce that phrase, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with, which is solvency, insolvent. The company that is insolvent, that is heading towards danger or is in danger. What's really important to stress when we discuss this is that there are different levels of a company that is insolvent. You've got companies that might be insolvent for a day or two, or a week or two. You might get a company that's insolvent for maybe a period over the next 6 months or a year, that it can look to put measures in place for either of those 2 scenarios. Or we've got companies that are insolvent long term. We would perhaps suggest that is a gone concern. But the 3 tests really for a company being insolvent is, first of all, the cash flow test. Quite simply, can the company pay its debts as and when they fall due?
Just to burn down, what is insolvent? Just to put a question out to everybody there. Karen, yeah, that's correct. Yeah. Okay, all right. I think we're getting a measure of it. Insolvent, which is what Ben's just about to sort of break down for you, is it's the company is unable to pay its debts as and when it falls due, as and when they fall due, should I say. These are the sort of 3 elements to that that Ben's about to explain. As part of that breakdown into the term insolvent.
Yes, so there's 3 real tests for a company that's insolvent. The first is the sheet suggests, the cash flow test, which is when a company can't pay its debts as and when they fall due. So if you've got a £5,000 invoice that lands and you've got to start juggling and robbing Peter to pay Paul, that's a good sign that there is the company's cash flow insolvent. Further is the balance sheet. It goes beyond just the daily cash flows, of course, because you may have assets tied up in property or bonds or other things which are saleable. And if your balance sheet is showing a positive position, then it could be true that it's solvent. But indeed, cash flow insolvent, which it causes the problems. Of course, if you've got a strong balance sheet, it is easier to plug those gaps through borrowing. And then the third one is the legal action test, which is, has your company received a CCJ? Of course, on the back of that, a company is unable to defend itself against a winding up petition. It is a declaration that the company is legally insolvent at that moment. You can get them satisfied, but certainly if you've got a CCJ hanging over you, that's another
county court judgment.
CCJ, county court judgment. That is a sign that the company is potentially insolvent.
When you get those, you will, if you happen to, you get a what's called a summons, which is a application to the court that you haven't paid that creditor the monies that you owe them, in the time in which it was agreed to, and therefore they've requested for that money. You haven't been able to pay that, so therefore they would then summons you to court, i.e. allow a judge to make the decision and to enforce something against you for non-payment. And that then, if you fail in court to sort of argue your corner, then that would move to a county court judgment. And from that then there's numerous things that they can do to enforce that against you.
Good question here from George. What are your thoughts on a company being insolvent due to directors' loans? What are our thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, directors' loan account, or the loans themselves, is a difficult one, because the company is remunerated the director for more than what it should have done, because it's then put it into a term of insolvency, i.e. it's unable to pay its bills because it's paid the director. We come across these quite a bit with these PSVs things.
Well, I think George is talking about the other way around here, which is it's thrown the company insolvent because it owes the director.
Right. Okay. Sorry, the other way around. Right.
So what the interesting thing here, though, George, is that it's not as severe as say an external creditor, simply because if the company were insolvent in any other because of other creditors, then the director is unable to pay themselves back that loan at that point. So the director can't legally harm the company by repaying it and throwing it into an even more insolvent position by paying themselves. It would be preferring, and that would not be allowed. So it's a good question. But if you had a personal service vehicle and it was only the director's loan which was in credit, which was showing the company to be insolvent, then it's not really going to be a massive problem unless the director demands the money back. Of course, you could have a rogue director that threatens to wind a company up. So unless you're very familiar with your board of directors, then there is a potential threat there. But if it's just you and it's your director's balance which is making the company balance sheet insolvent, then it's not as much of a threat as, say, if you were to owe the revenue the money.
But you can also do it on the other side of that. You can balance the business by doing a loan note, in essence, so that the business owes the director money, but it's when in which they can call upon those monies. That might be a year, 2 years, 3 years. So you're actually spreading your liability over a longer period. It's another way of dealing with that.
Okay, so there we go. Got a bit of a pause there.
Okay, so what are your options? There you've got, which will break down in the next slide, you've got your company turnaround, your financing, your company restarts and closure. So the turnaround. Initially, when we get involved with a turnaround situation, it's because there's something there to be turned around. There's some viability in this entity, and within making some alterations to it, or getting some support and assistance from the creditors, you're able to keep this business alive, and or indeed on the opposite side of it, to sell off some of its work to be able to manage to sort of address its liabilities. So a consulting, which is a time to pay. So I'll use HMRC, for example, for this one. HMRC predominantly will enter into what's called a TTP, and that's predominantly over a 12-month period, and that is done from yourself. You put together a forecasted repayment system to them. What I tend to find a lot of people don't do is counter into that the trends of their business. So they will say, for example, they owe £10,000. They're going to spread it. They'll get an arrangement with HMRC. If they just put them into a time to pay, then they can spread that over those 12 months. The problem is they make the same payments each month over those 12 months. And trading in businesses tend to go through ebbs and flows. And so from a consultant perspective, we look at that. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's what we look at, and that's one of the biggest problems we see.
There is as well a less severe sort of angle to our consultant roles where there is a problem, a trading problem, and it could be that the fix might be more of from a management perspective, where we would look to put the right people. We can go in there and see that, going way back to when we started talking at the beginning of the webinar, to knowing your figures. We might go into a company, they can't understand why, they're getting orders coming out out their ears, and they're running around, they're busy, but they can't understand why they're having problems. And it could be that we go in there and set up their accounting software correctly and put an in-house bookkeeper in for them, and then 6 months later they're amazed at the turnaround, because they can. So it's not necessarily all doom and gloom. It can be small things, yeah. Going on to a more formal arrangement here, Rich just talked about, from a consulting perspective, we can look to ease creditor pressure by arranging time to pay. If that is unsuccessful from an informal approach, which I would say, generally speaking, if it's your first time round, a time to pay is pretty achievable, then there is something called a CVA, which is you've probably heard them on the news recently. I think I'm right in saying Debenhams, which is House of Fraser, they're still trading. House of Fraser, they've just gone into a CVA.
It's a company voluntary arrangement.
That's right, sorry, yeah. The company voluntary arrangement is similar to we've all heard of the IVAs probably, which is the individual voluntary arrangement, the individual's version. But really what it's doing, it's a legal process which ring fences your creditors and allows you to trade through the problem, essentially. The caveat to that is that it is a formal insolvency measure, so it would come with potential repercussions if you were dealing with certain suppliers. I had a company that insisted on going into a CVA, although we explained to them it could cause them problems. They used to work fulfilling contracts for schools and did their playgrounds. And after they got into the CVA, 6 months later, they lost all their contracts because the school or the local council or whatever didn't want to deal with a company that gone into an insolvency measure. So it's worth noting that it is a formal arrangement.
And administration, will touch on that quickly, and you've heard about that, I'm sure, in the news. There's been a lot of high street stores closing, and yeah, again, it's a way of ring fencing a business so that enables it the time to address its current position. It tends to be used for larger concerns, because it's a very expensive way of dealing with it.
It's usually for sale as well. They're usually looking for a buyer for that company. I think Pound World at the moment is the big one in the news for that. One of the directors is trying to put an offer in to buy the company back, but Deloitte are blocking it. He probably wants to buy it for £1, that's why.
Okay, we've got financing, so the different types of financing for different scenarios, and we'll just touch upon them that we've got, I don't know if you've heard of it before, but factoring.
Yeah, that's a way of, for example, very popular in the recruitment industry. You're paying your staff each week, but you're getting paid by the main client of yours each month. So there's obviously the cash flow problem. So the factoring, you actually raise the funds on day one of the invoice, which allows you to free up the cash.
You've got loans there, which we all know about. Grants, be mindful, because councils and other bodies do provide grants, whether you're having your website done and it's going to cost £5,000. There is depending on where you are, what's going on, but have a good look around, because you might fall into being advanced 50% of that or 30% of that for a grant. You obviously get your overdraft. That's a one that is the easier one, I suppose. The in and outside of it is having a conversation with the bank to sort of float you over a period of time. Maybe in a down period of your trending, that you do need some short-term assistance. Then we'll move on to investors and directors and shareholders. Investors really are, be mindful that they are termed investors because that's what they do. They're in it for a return. So probably haven't got the will and the desire like you have in your business. Directors and shareholders, same again, that you can put monies in, same as what George mentioned earlier on, with regards to assisting the business in that way.
This is one which always raised a few points of contention, which is a company restart. They notoriously get bad press. We've probably heard them over the years with different guises. You've got Phoenix companies, or you might have heard of a pre-pack administration, but these are all ways of really making the old company, boxing that up, and then taking all of the good parts of that company and moving it over into a new company. So you're able to retain staff and contracts and the success of the old company, but get rid of the problem that was existing. I think there's the question to that is always how should you be allowed to do that? How can you do that? Is it a bit dodgy? Just to dispel all of that, if you imagine these poor subcontractors who were working primarily for Carillion, they've got a team of guys and they're very, very successful and they've been doing it for many, many years. All of a sudden, Carillion go bust on them, and it shuts them down overnight. Now, that's not the director's fault. It's nobody's fault for that particular company. It's potentially they put all their eggs in one basket, but if you say it like that and you see it like that, then you kind of realise there's guys here that are working, they're earning a living, they're doing a good job. Why shouldn't they be able to continue doing what they're doing?
Yeah, we do. We come across these quite a lot. The actual business is viable. It's just it has been affected by one means or another. And like Ben mentioned, that one that's quite a big one at the moment. But all these high streets that are shutting down, there's a supply chain there that have been supplying. Maybe they've been caught out. They've not had the eggs in one basket. They've had numerous customer bases, but the way it's going in the high streets at the moment, it might be all your customers have gone. Unfortunately, they're shutting up, which they don't. They need your supply. So, yeah, again, that affects you. But you've got a good business there. And we had a gentleman in one presentation recently, and he felt a little bit aggrieved about this restart. But another way to look at it is that something is being dealt with, the debt. I think the gentleman was owed £10,000, I think, wasn't he? Mm-hmm. And he said, well, why should I'm owed £10,000? I'm not going to get my £10,000. So, this is wrong that this company's restarting and so forth. But, the other side of this is that if something didn't happen with this business continued doing what it was doing, then that gentleman's £10,000 could have soon turned into £40,000. And therefore, that had been a worse situation obviously to be in. So it's uncomfortable for the creditors involved. It's uncomfortable for everybody involved in it. But there is a way and means of which you can restart, and that business can also then continue trading and buying the same supplies and goods from that company. So it can remunerate. The company's still getting benefits from that remuneration if that company then continues to trade, as opposed to not trading. You shut it down, everything gets closed, and that circle of people or businesses would receive no benefit from it.
Yeah, and I think just dispelling the myth, people think instantly that there's somebody profiting from this. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that there are unscrupulous directors out there that may have done this in the past, but I can honestly say that virtually everybody, every director that rings up that is in the position where they're having to do this, they're at the top of the tree when it comes to losing out. Often their house is on the line, they're losing their livelihood. They don't do this to make money. This isn't a calculated scheme.
And for us, they're in the best position to do so because they've already run the business. They've already had the year's experience for it. So to transition it into something else makes sense.
Makes sense. And then the third one is complete closure, really, which is where somebody wishes to close the company and walk away, and that's really falls into three headers, and it gets a bit heavy. This, I think, we'll keep it fairly light on on going into them, into the technicality of them. But
first off, you've got what's called a dissolution. Now, this is predominantly performed for those companies that haven't sufficient monies really to pay for a formal liquidation type service. They are in a position where they are small, they have very little resources, and they are shutting the doors due to maybe retirement or going back into employment again. They've tried it, it's not worked for them, and so they tend to fall into these type of categories. But predominantly it's at the point where they're not being able to pay the creditors, they don't have enough cash flow coming through to be able to go into any formal process of closure.
Yeah, the second one is a formal process, a creditor's voluntary liquidation. You may just know it as liquidation, but this is essentially where the director voluntarily appoints or recommends to the shareholders that they voluntarily wind the company up and put it into liquidation. It has to be carried out by a licensed insolvency practitioner. There's lots of myths around this. Is it going to affect me? Am I going to be liable for the debts? Do I have to have a meeting? Do I have to? The truth is that unless there's been no trading issues by the directors, then no, there will be no comeback on the directors. The concerns over the meetings that used to take place are kind of dispelled nowadays, because it can be done through one of a number of decision processes, one being a deemed consent rule now, where there is no meeting, or indeed you can have a virtual meeting. So like this webinar, it's held. And of course, what's going to happen to the staff that haven't been paid, these sorts of things. Well, when you have a formal, unlike the dissolution, then there is the redundancy office, which will take care of severance pays.
Then you've got the compulsory liquidation. Now, this is when the closure has been forced against you, and this is predominantly done by maybe the HMRC or other creditors. They've had enough and they've gone through the necessary processes and to serve you with what's called a winding up order. That is then served upon you, and at that point then you are under restriction as to how you then trade that moving forward. You will get what's called an official receiver, an OR for short, that will be appointed as the person to deal with the liquidation of the company, and then you would be asked to conform accordingly with all the requirements of that. So it gets very busy in a very short period of time. It's very uncomfortable, and it's not what we advise to avoid. Better to take the control of if the business is having to be closed, you're better to be in control of it than to have the control being dealt with by others that they're going to close it.
There's a question there from Karen, who I think joined a bit late, asking if a director can force a compulsory liquidation on their own company, in essence. The answer to that is yes. It's pretty rare, but it sort of ties into what George asked earlier. If you were to fall out with the board, or there was a split and the director was owed monies, then that's one way that they could actually force a compulsory liquidation of the company. And similarly, when the company is very, very large, like Carillion, they appoint the official receiver. They go through a court closure, because it could be deemed that a company of that size, choosing your buddy at the bank to take care of it for you, or your pals like Philip Green did, is not transparent. So they would put it in the hands of the court rather than choosing their own liquidator.
Yes, it's uncomfortable. That this part of closure is an uncomfortable area, that particular side of it, because you're not in control of it. It happens, and you have to conform. If not, you get into more trouble related to it. So you're better off, in the nutshell, dealing with your situation, knowing your situation is coming about, which is what we've been presenting to you from the start, really. Being aware of those type of situations, then knowing how you're going to deal with those situations. And this really then is the cap to it, is that if you got to a point here that you're in an unfortunate position where action is being forced against you, then you're better off taking action and don't bury your head in the sand, like a lot of people tend to do. They just tend to get the heads down and try and create more work to then create the money to which to pay these, this requirement. You're better off just taking an holistic view of your business, stepping back, take some time out, looking at it and going, okay, so what are my problems? Give us a call. We're happy to have a chat with you over the phone, but to sort of point in the right direction is how you are best to view your business if you've considered that you're heading in this direction.
Well, like Rick's just really sort of saying then, just to summarise, it's about having control of the situation. And if you are in a position where you are under threat of a winding up order or a winding up proposal, then people ring us up and say, well, why don't we just let it go that direction? Well, you'd rather sort of take your destiny in your own hands, really, and make that choice yourself.
Okay, we've got a nice picture of a toolbox here, well, tools hanging up on a wall. So your tools, really, you've got the assets of the business. Who owns the assets? Are they the companies? Are you utilising? Are you a vehicle that you don't actually own? You are paying for that vehicle, and it doesn't become it's dependent on how you've structured your finance arrangement with that. Your trading, exposed entity and asset holding.
Yeah, I think as well, it's just about giving you some hints and tips about how you can safeguard yourself. We see these sorts of things all the time. One of them George brought up again. George will pick on you today. The director's loan account. If your company were to get into a situation where it had to close and had to liquidate, and you found that, unlike George was saying earlier, that the director's loan was the other way round, it was in debit, and indeed you owed the company money, then we see this a lot. They're not even aware of it. The directors aren't aware that they owe the company money because the way that they're checking their drawings. So it's imperative that you have a firm understanding. You ask your accountant, you know where that director's loan account is, because if it comes to point of closure and you owed
one I did today.
Yeah.
Dealing with this gentleman for the past sort of 6 weeks, really. He's finishing off a contract. The business is going to be closed because he's going to go off and do something separate. 6 members of staff and so forth. And we've gone through the process, asking them relevant questions, and it's come about several times within discussion as to where his director's loan account sits. And it was only on the final hour of sort of closure that it became apparent to him that he's a £25,000 director's loan account, which he wasn't aware of.
I think we're battling with one at the moment, but it's going to be far higher than that, right? It's and similarly with PGs, how exposed are you? Be very, very careful. I mean, you should be very aware when you sign a personal guarantee. It should be made very clear to you. You should be offered legal assistance when signing them. But the banks, other lenders that we see, they casually drop them in the T's and C's. And okay, it might be that you can have an argument to say that I wasn't aware I was signing it, or whatever the case may be. But try fighting a bank. Try fighting, at a time when everything else is going bad. So just be aware what you're signing up to.
Unfortunately, you have a limited liability company, and that should be what it is. But over the time, this has just got tighter and tighter, and unfortunately, lenders will not lend unless they've not only got the company's head, but your head as well on the chopping block for these PGs. And it is a concern because, if things do go wrong in the business, then although the business is unable to address that debt, it then triggers the personal guarantee which comes against you personally. So you've not only lost your business, you've also then they're coming after you personally as well.
And just a further point, Rick was touching on the assets earlier, but we're talking here about really manager-owned companies, which a lot of SMEs can and tend to be, does that property need to be in the company? You are exposing yourself and that asset. It's quite often that we see sole traders that have succeeded over the years and have turned into a limited company, and the accountants just shifted everything into the company. And they do that. Accountants will do this because it's tax efficient. They'll say, well, we'll sell it to the company. We'll put 250,000 in a direct loan account, and you can draw that tax free for the next however many years. But the point is, it sounds all very rosy, but if that company were to fail, then you've lost those assets. So it's very, very important that you're aware of what you're doing. And if you want to know more about that, then feel free to give us a call. I think we'll have some information at the end.
Just back to what Ben was mentioning there, is that from a company perspective, it depends on the size you're at and what you're doing, but you can have a trading arm of your business, i.e. the one that is exposed, it trades, it's at the front line of your business, and then you can also have an asset holding business. Now, it's obviously I haven't got the time to go into it here, but that is a way in which you can actually hold your assets separate to the exposed entity, so that you're covering that off if you do encounter a problem further down the line. Then it's the trading entity that's going to encounter it, not your holding company, and therefore your assets are protected. So there's different ways and means you can apply what we've been sort of telling you today, but that's just another way to deal with it.
Yeah, it just brings us on to what Forbes Burton can help you with, and that's one of the points, and it's the first point here, part of restructuring, not just in the sense of from a Phoenix or a pre-pack sense, but restructuring an entity so that it's efficient in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I go in, I try to get, we discuss with business on a day-to-day basis, and we try to get to them as early as we can. And if we can do that, then there is a lot more options available and things that we can do. And it's there's a concern sometimes, isn't it, when we get them and you think, if only you'd spoken to me 3 weeks ago, there's more we could have done, but the final throws. But I do get that people have traded, they've fought every day, they've battled, they've tried to get this business going, and they've hardly paid themselves and so forth, and that's what you're into battling. But I can't stress enough that people should take a step back and work on the business as they work in the business. So don't just work in the business constantly. Take that time out and step back and spend a day a week just working on the business, and then you will be able to start to implement the things in which we've been talking about today.
That's just some of the points that we can help you with. Just coming back to that, if you've got any problems with any of those points, or you'd like to ask some or get some further information from us about any of these points, or anything else that you might be struggling with, any sort of problem, any niggle, any more major distress, anything that you're having problems with your business at the moment, then do feel free to contact us.
Yeah, it's free. I mean, we'll have a chat with you on the phone. It's not going to cost you anything, and in the hope that it puts you in the right direction, and you don't need to speak to us again moving forward, or you're making the pub, that type of situation that they're encountering. But anyway, so that's us. Thank you very much for attending, everybody. We've had a good showing, and we've had some good questions as well, and it's really kind of taking the time out to engage with us. We have numerous events that we're holding. I think the next one's, Chris, London, are they? That are going to be coming up in September time. So if you want to see us face to face, I'm sure there'll be marketing material that will come out in relationship to that. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them at us, and thank you for attending.